Greetings, Lance here.
First ever European-friendly CDM.
Indeed.
Lint,
Our first.
yeah, it was muted.
The first topic is the blue sort tunables. That was really Josh and Neha. They aren't here yet.
Would you mind sharing the link on the chat? I'm just trying to find it. Thank you.
Yep. There you go. Oops. Let's just wait one more minute and see if Josh and Nia don't show up. We can start with Ceph ADM. Yeah, let's just do that. I hear it. All right, Sebastian, do you want to start with the status update on where things are at?
Yeah, so lots of stuff going on. So we have what's the status? We have mainly lots of minor fixes and minor improvements, with the exception of stuff that is currently work in progress. So we have the monitoring work in progress, like commands for adding node exporters, adding Prometheus is work in progress. Deploying NFS is work in progress, which is also very nice. Other than that, there are some urgent issues unfixed for the orchestrator. Let me have a look at Redmine. Have a list of urgent issues, which includes things like testing failures, bugs. Other than that, there are also still a lot of issues that are targeted for Octopus, but I doubt that we are going to be able to implement all of them for the initial Octopus version. So, yeah, as I said, it's usable. Sage, you've updated your local cluster to be now managed by Ceph ADM.
Yep. Yeah, let's see. Maybe I'll make a done list too. Yeah, so I updated my local cluster. So on manager, OSD, MDS, W, those all work, although my local cluster is no RGW. Those will behave. I think the main issue I have right now is that I'll notice a few like rough edges that I'm fixing. The main thing is that if whenever there's a connectivity failure to a host, because they're in the background, it's checking that the hosts are reachable. The exception is thrown in the serve thread, and that crashes the module, and so we're not catching the exception somewhere. So I need to go fix that. I think I finally have a backtrace in my current log, so I can go look at. But I went through the whole adoption process, at least manual. manually, and that worked. I ended up fixing a bunch of issues along the way, sort of exacerbated by the fact that my cluster is really old. Some of the blue stores are from like Kraken era, so they're deployed with Ceph disk. But managed to get that whole thing to work. So there's the Ceph Ansible team is going to do a Ansible playbook to do that like adoption conversion process. I haven't checked in with them in the last week or so I'm not sure when exactly they're gonna do that, but that's sort of the first item on the to-do list there. I think the main gap right now is on the monitoring side and just the sort of the failure handling. There's also a bunch of ambiguity around how to deal with hosts and host names. And actually, if you look at the latest pull request, I think I have a plan that will work path forward. So the current PR basically makes it so that the name of the host that you're using for Ceph ADM matches the actual host name on the host. So if you're using a fully qualified domain as the identifier, then it should match the host should have a fully qualified domain as the host name. If it's a short name, it should be a short name, which I think is reasonable. If nothing else, that means that the metadata that daemons are reporting as their host name will match up, and if that's used in the crush map and so on will match up with the Ceph ADM host, and so things will just sort of fit together. The problem with that is I think it assumes that DNS works, and that DNS works with that short name if you're using short names on all your nodes, so that they can all talk to each other regardless of where the manager is scheduled. And I don't think that's always the case. So I think what we need to do is add the ability to specify on a per host basis what IP or fully qualified domain or something to use to contact the host to reach it. That makes sense. So that way you can use short names, but you can specify IPs, and then you don't rely on DNS for the whole thing to hold together. Yeah, there's a comment here about that. What else? What else is on the pad? I think the OSD stuff, we just need to make sure that's all sort of tidied up too. So I guess, Lens, this would be I think there are probably some like small tweaks that we should try to do on the dashboard too to make sure that this works. David was pointing out that when you're doing a
Sorry, I was just distracted. My wife was in the background. Could you repeat?
No problem. Yeah, I think there's some minor changes on the dashboard that we might want to make too with regards to the way the drive group stuff works. David was noticing that when you're like viewing a device list, there isn't a way to just like literally point at an OSD or a device and say create an OSD on that device.
Right.
Like you have to construct these groups and filter by, I don't know, you have to like work around it sort of, as opposed to just say that one.
Right. So the explicit way of kind of picking an individual device on an individual OSD is currently not even implemented in Ceph ADM as far as I'm concerned. It only consumes drive groups. Because that's the only way that it really scales, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's right. I mean, if you're trying to do something at scale, then yes, you want to do pattern matching on device models and stuff like that. But if you're just an interactive user and you're like replacing a disk, you're like, that's the one I want to create the OSD right there. You can do it. So and for Ceph ADM itself, it does, like on the command line, you can just pass the command device name, like .sdb, and it'll just do it. I know it's certainly possible.
Yeah, well, that's working on an individual OSD. I think that's next in the queue for Kiefer to work on.
Yeah. Okay.
So he started with OSD add using drive group specs. Now I think he's at the removal part, and then next he was also looking into replacing them, and then adding single ones might be in line. So I assume we will have to continue with following along with Ceph ADM development and continue making changes to dashboard in sync, likely even beyond whatever Octopus release will have. So this is an area that is still kind of evolving and trickling. But I mean, Sebastian and Kiefer do talk regularly about this, so he's following the development there.
So what I do have in mind is that it should be possible to specify a single device by its Ceph volume device ID, or that we get from UDEF, which makes it independent of the path that the device appears. And yeah, that sounds like what we can actually do in the dashboard.
Okay. So Sebastian, you just shared a link to a feature to allow filtering by device ID.
Yeah.
So once that's done on the Ceph ADM level, we can then add this to the dashboard as well.
Yep.
Okay. What else? So somebody's working on the NFS gateways for FFS. I have a feeling that one's going to be ready. But nobody's looked at the RGW NFS gateways yet. Or iSCSI.
iSCSI is missing, definitely.
Yeah. I guess you have tracker issues for all of these already, but I think no one has gotten around to tackling those yet.
Yeah. Just have a look at the open issues.
Okay. There's the enforcing the password change on first login. Is that almost ready?
Yes, that one went through several iterations. The first one was submitted by someone at Fujitsu. They were pretty junior, so the code took a while to get to a state. Then the developer moved on and couldn't follow up with remaining changes, and we took it over, had to rework it a bit. It's still slated to make it within the next, I would say, 1 or 2 weeks. We are pretty close to that one.
Okay.
Only the QA tests are missing, and I started them this morning, and they look pretty good.
Cool.
Thanks for the update, Tatiana. I didn't see you were in here as well.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
And in general, it would be cool. In general, it would be cool if someone actually would try Ceph ADM.
Yeah. Maybe do you want to send an email to Ceph users, maybe, and ask for people to give it a try? That'd be good.
Is the documentation up to date enough for people to do that?
I think it's pretty close, but we should take a look. Might be slightly off.
How about a quick blog post, just a quick how to get started?
Yeah, that'd be good.
These are the commands to run, and then here you go.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was planning on toying around with it in more in-depth next week when we have our SUSE Hack Week. Time to spend some more time on actual stuff and code, not just overhead and management things.
Yeah. Yeah, the docs can be improved because right now they include all the host stuff. And I think that can be left off. It'll schedule automatically now. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Still a lot to sort out,
Yep.
but at least the guts are there now.
Yeah. Getting there. Cool. Okay. Looks like Josh is here now. Do you want to talk about? We move on to the Octopus defaults.
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to talk about a few different default settings before we release Octopus. We've already talked about the autoscaler a bit. We turned it on for new pools and it'll list warn for existing pools. I think that one that primarily wanted to address was the balancer. Right now it's loaded in the module, but we're not actually turning it on and enabling it, so it's not actually active. I think ideally it would be nice if we could turn it on in upmap mode so we can get that fine-grained balancing, but that does require minimum clients being set to Luminous. So I guess the question is, at what point can we do that by default? Like, can we do that for new clusters with Octopus? I think in the past when we talked about kind of client support, we talked about again Nautilus supporting dual clients. Maybe Octopus could support Luminous clients, not dual.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems fair. And it's also a new cluster, so it's not like we're going to break something. It's just going to cause friction
Right.
if somebody has an old set of clients and they deploy a new cluster and they try to mount it. They'll get an error. But do we definitely want upmap mode by the default?
Well, I think if you do crash compat mode, then we have to, I think, want to switch to upmap mode eventually. So if we do crash compat mode, we have to some cleanup of the weight sets later to migrate to upmap. So it's, might as well just clear it off with it.
Okay. Okay. So the one thing that crush compat mode lets you do, which is kind of nice in some cases, is that you can set the default weight set weight to 0. So that when you add a new host or add a new OSD, its target weight is set at the actual size of the OSD, but its compat weight is 0. And then the balancer will slowly ramp that up and fill it in the background or whatever. I don't know if that map mode doesn't have sort of an equivalent yet.
It doesn't have the exact same thing though, but you can do the same thing I think today with it, just by setting the initial weight of the OSD to 0, and then if you just set it to 1, it'll slowly be balanced.
Right, but then you have to manage the weights. It doesn't happen. The balancer doesn't sort of magically. Like it's nice to have the weight be the desired state or whatever the target, the actual size of the device.
There's a PR for the new command to do the weight management automatically in the manager.
Oh, there is.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
I think it was implemented it as a separate module, get drain OSD module. Maybe it was only for draining, or not for adding, but it's the same thing.
For draining. Yeah, there's one for draining. But we can implement something in there that does something similar too. Yeah. Yeah, there just isn't really like quite an equivalent. Unless we like had a dual mode where even in upmap mode it would still set the compat weight to 0 at the same time, but always just make it converge directly to the real weight. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, I don't think we're going to change anything quickly, but think about going forward. Well, I'm
definitely
okay
more
with doing
improvements
that.
we can make to that mode in general. It doesn't consider the bytes directly right now, and we can add that more general kind of balancing, so it doesn't only consider
Yeah.
PG num just like the compat mode does.
Yeah. Yep.
But okay, sounds like folks are okay. We
Yeah.
can just turn this on by default in Octopus, and with new clusters require the min clients to be Luminous.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay, autoscaler.
Lens has left a comment saying the dashboard supports setting the autoscaler mode when you create the pool.
Cool. Okay. Does that mean when you create the pool, you don't have to specify PGs? You can just use the default lens.
Sorry, I'm having too much stuff going on in the background.
No worries. Yep.
What was the
Is that
question?
a question about on the create pool dialog? You
Yes.
have a note here that says you can set the autoscaler mode. Does that mean that when you create a pool, you can not think about PGs? You can just say create pool autoscale and not fill in the number.
It's now possible to select by default the value will be used, and I think you probably still have to enter a value for the placement groups, but it will just wander off once you enter it.
Yeah.
I don't think
I wonder if we could
completely hiding the field.
or if we can pre-populate it with the default setting maybe in the box.
Let me double check that, and then I'll go back.
That'd probably be a quick change. Because I'm just worried about the people who don't know what it is, what it means,
Yeah, good
and
point.
they just want to. If we default to autoscale on, even, and then it could even be. I don't know if it makes sense to just gray it out or something, or not.
I'll ask
not gray it out
Ricardo
because he still.
But it checks the value of what PG autoscale mode is being set for, and that's what it defaults to. But you can override it if you want something different for that particular pool. But yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
If it's enabled, why asking for placement groups to begin with? That's a good enhancement. That should be fairly easy to do.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right, RocksDB.
Yeah, so this is more about the remove range setting. This is kind of not really a user level thing, but more of a performance thing. We had this setting for when we want to use remove range in RocksDB right now, and currently we have that in master. We have a threshold of 1,000 keys, but we don't yet have kind of any data to support when that threshold is useful. So there's some testing going on right now. I think the cat's going to do some tests in the next few weeks probably, but we don't have data yet to say, is this a good value for it or not? So my proposal for Octopus is that we turn this off, so we don't have the setting anymore. We don't have the possibility of a bad performance impact. And when we do have the data setting showing that it's useful, we can backport that to Octopus.
Backport just changing the setting or the actual code?
Backport so my proposal is to revert the code entirely in Octopus. So we don't have. So the problem is that at least for the initial testing with RBD, to have the threshold set to 0.
Too much.
It has way too high overhead for CPU and the internal RocksDB bookkeeping. So I want to kind of avoid a foot gun here by just removing the option.
I'm just thinking if we can set the setting to like advanced or something. Well, already advanced, but then just set it to a really big number. Because this is something that was hurting RGW users, right? When they had like a really big log to trim or garbage collection queue or something. I don't remember exactly what it was.
That's the idea for the use case, but we don't have the data to tell whether it actually helps for that use case yet or not.
We know that when we didn't have this at all, then it was a huge problem, right? It would like OSDs would flap because they're iterating over like 1 million keys and so on. Like we know that
Yeah.
for 1 million, for example, we want it. So
Well, not necessarily. We don't know that it doesn't also have a terrible impact on listing at the same time, even in that use case.
Casey, do you have
Mark?
any thoughts here?
Well, my thought is that we absolutely need this in order to scale log trimming. Basically, we just can't trim enough keys as is to keep up without melting OSDs. But yeah, I've been talking about it with Josh and Neha, and I do feel like we need a workload that actually exercises this to see how it performs, what it can keep up with.
Okay.
And
I'm just
so
I'm just worried about removing the code because if it's like hurting somebody, they have to like wait around for 6 weeks for an update as opposed to just changing an option. Seems like it would be safer just to set this to a bigger number, maybe 10,000 or 100,000 or something, so that it'll
Yeah, we could do that.
capture the 1 million key case, but won't trigger for like log trimming or whatever, PG logs.
Sure. Yeah, we could set an arbitrarily high number so that's basically impossible to hit with that setting. That seems fine.
Or at least even
I
something
suspect we
over.
might make the code a little more complex, like to account for trying to flush these tombstones out of the tables to make sure that they don't go around and cause extra overhead. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's just that we know that when you have 1 million keys that it's needed, right? Because
we know something's needed. We don't know whether this works there or not. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We've seen it have a lot of overhead after it's used with listing and all subsequent operations because Recipe has to take into account the tombstones after that point. And we don't know whether it'll still happen with that case in leading an option with 1 million keys too.
Casey, were there any actual production systems where this was enabled to work around the trimming?
We haven't shipped it to any customers, and I'm not sure what VicYat and the workload DFG have done with it so far.
Okay. They're working on this now-ish, though, right? We'll hopefully have an answer in the next week or two.
Yeah, probably next month, I would say.
Okay. Well, I guess I suggest then just setting it to a big number in the meantime.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay. I guess other things. Telemetry is obviously opt by default, but the module is on. The module is enabled, but telemetry is set to off. And currently all the channels, all channels enabled. So that's the basic, the crash, and the device. So by default, if you turn on telemetry, it will include the smart data from your devices. I think that's good because we want to build that data set, and it'll be part of the opt-in process. We'll be doing that and giving the user an option to review it. You're just changing it right now so that when you do the telemetry show at the bottom, if the device channel is enabled, it'll have a little note that says also the device telemetry is enabled, and there's a separate command that shows that data because it goes to a different endpoint. It's not linked to your cluster data for privacy reasons.
I have an update on that from a dashboard point of view as well.
Okay.
While we already do have a way to configure the telemetry module as any other module, right now you don't have a way to preview the report in the dashboard because that is a separate workflow. We are going to have an updated, more streamlined page that guides the user through the steps, makes it a bit easier for them to enable the channels and preview what is actually going to be submitted before they opt in.
Awesome. Okay. I had one other question, I guess, too. So at one point I had a patch that had a nag mode where it would, when you installed a new cluster, it would have a health warning that says you have an enabled telemetry. You either should turn it off or on. But it just annoyed me. So it was immediately annoying to me, so I turned it off. But I wonder if people think that's a good or a bad idea.
The approach for the dashboard is going to verify upon the first login of a new user if the module is enabled, and then prompt them to go through that workflow once. They can ignore it. If they want to, then we won't nag them again, but they can still go back manually at any point in time if they want to, and then go through the workflow in the dashboard.
Sorry, Lance, did you say that for existing clusters or just for new installations?
That's probably regardless. It's about you as a new dashboard user logging in. That would have been my idea. We'd have to have a user with the admin privileges to do that. But if you log into the dashboard and you would be having the permissions to actually make that change, the dashboard should verify, is the telemetry module enabled? If not, remind the user that they should enable it. And they can then either go through the process or simply cancel it, and then the dashboard won't nag them again.
Okay, that sounds good.
I wonder if we should make it so we can trigger that behavior if it's like a fresh, not if it's a fresh cluster, but if it's a freshly upgraded cluster. Like after each major upgrade or something like that. We just take the opportunity to nag them. It'll happen once a year, basically.
That would be another way of doing it, just periodically pinging them, hey, you still haven't enabled, but need to find a period that is not getting too annoying. The health warning, of course, is much more intrusive than that. Yeah. So first step is having that page with the workflow and previewing the actual printout of what was going to be submitted to give them a more confidence in enabling that. And then we can think about what modes can we enable this and how can we make it more visible.
Yeah. Okay. It just occurred to me actually that one thing that I think might be missing is just like a status. I think there is a Ceph telemetry status command that shows you what's enabled and what isn't, but it doesn't tell you the last time it phoned home. Although I think we might store a report of the last thing that was communicated, but we don't say when it was. So I wonder if we should update that, just so you know that it's working, it successfully sent data back, at this time, yesterday or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, right now the Ceph telemetry status command is just like a big blob of JSON with a bunch of random stuff. That's a little bit awkward. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Currently I checked a couple days ago, we have 220 clusters that are actively phoning home. Thought we maybe should set a goal for ourselves for like 500 or 1,000 in the next month or two, and then just like try to do another push on the user lists and Twitter and so on, just trying to convince people to turn it on.
And this is why it's a good idea to nag them when they do a major update, maybe just once.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. Okay. Let's see, anything else for Octopus that we should think about? Other defaults that we changed.
Just a quick update on autoscaler and how it's done on the dashboard. So Ricardo confirmed if autoscaler is enabled, and well, you configure that pool to have the autoscaler enabled, we will just default to setting the PG_num to 1 created. But somebody added a comment. I'm not sure who that was.
That was me. Yeah.
Okay.
We could probably, instead of setting it to 1, just like make it disappear and just leave it, let the cluster use this default value.
Right. So you won't see it, but the dashboard behind the user's back will set it to 1. But if you think we should be using a different value, if there's a way to obtain what the default is, then
or set it to no value at all. If you just don't specify it when you create it, then it'll just use the default.
Okay. Maybe that's an easy fix. Leave it empty. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Okay. All right. CephFS async metadata for that. Yeah, Jeff's here. Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm here. I can talk about it. Maybe I should try to share my slides from. I gave a talk on this at FOSDEM, so I figured I'd just kind of breeze through the latter.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, that'd be great. Let me see if I can make this presentation thing work. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'm not going to bother trying to make this presentation mode look nice or anything. So I gave a talk on this at FOSDEM, and most of the beginning of this is just really talking about what CephFS is and about caps. So I'm going to breeze through that because you guys already know. So anyway, we're looking to add asynchronous metadata operations in CephFS. So the real problem, I'll at least go with one slide up here, which is that no surprise, right? Network file systems have slow directory operations. So if you're doing like an open or an unlink or something like that, almost always involves a synchronous round trip to the server. And so this affects all sorts of workloads, right? Like if you're removing a big directory, you have to go and do a bunch of synchronous unlinks before you can actually go remove the directory. If you're doing creates, you can't do anything with the file until the round trip, to create the file comes back from the MBS. But we have caps, so we could, the idea is that we're going to extend file caps to cover which are largely unused on directories right now, but we're going to extend them to cover directory operations too. So we're sort of overloading them with new meaning for directories. And so mostly what we're doing is like here, synchronous unlinks. As I said, no surprise to anybody here that this is pretty slow. You have to do a bunch of round trips if you want to remove a big directory, and eventually, once it's all done, you can remove the directory. And so we also have a decision we have to make too when we want to do these async operations, right? We have to decide, do we want to transmit them immediately or not? And so the operating principle we're going on is that workloads that repeatedly create and unlink the same files or the same entries are pretty rare. And so we are operating under the principle that there's really nothing to be gained from buffering these operations at this time. So basically, what that means is that when we get an async request, we'll just fire it off immediately to the MDS, not wait on the reply, assume that it just worked, and then we'll come back and handle any errors when the reply comes in. So the upshot of that is that we have some requirements, right? You can't just do an async directory operation. You need caps on the directory. In particular, you need the exclusive cap on the directory, and you need an unlink cap. So the unlink cap is a new thing. Zhang did a bunch of work in the MDS to basically add a lock caching facility for directories. The idea is that on the first synchronous unlink or creating a directory, he'll gather a bunch of locks, and then he'll cache those locks, and then hand out caps based on those. So if we have competing access, he'll lose the lock and revoke the caps. But that does mean that we need to do a first synchronous unlink or create a directory in order to be able to enable the rest of the async.
This was done to avoid that deadlock that was hit early on. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I'm not remembering what that is either.
Yeah,
I mean, we did hit some. Yeah. I think Zhang I'm gonna. I could let him speak on it. I think he's here actually, if you want to talk about it. But as far as I know, he did it just because you need to be able to have all these locks to do that, and that was the most expedient way to do it internally in the MDS.
Makes sense. Okay.
Zhang, you want to comment? Busy. So, in any case,
okay.
The idea is that we're going to fire off a call to the MDS, and when the reply comes in, and then we'll just immediately delete the entry locally. We do need to have a positive entry for this thing. Does that mean we either need a positive entry lease on the file, or we need to the exclusive cap on the directory and a shared cap on the directory, but we're going to have exclusive caps because we can't do this anyway otherwise, and a positive entry. And we also have to know that this thing is the primary entry, right? It can't be hard linked. I'm not sure what happens actually if you try to remove the primary entry of a hard linked file, but Zhang had some reasons internally in the MDS why that had to be the case. And so the other thing is that if we want to do an RMDIR or something, we have to flush these out, wait for all the replies to come. And so at some point in the future, we may consider doing async RMDIR, which might also speed things up. But for now, we don't have that.
So for now, if you're actually deleting a big tree, we're basically pipelining for every directory. We pipeline all the unlinks.
Right. Exactly. Right. And so it does. I have some numbers I'll show you here in a minute. But for now, you can see the. So basically, what you see here is that we just spray out all the unlinked requests and gather up all the replies. And then when an RMDIR comes in, we have to block inside the RMDIR function until all the replies come in for children being unlinked. Okay. And so with performances, so here's this is on my personal virtualized test rig set up here. So these numbers take them with a grain of salt, but they give you sort of an idea of what we're the kind of performance improvements we'll see, right? In this case, I'm just removing all the files in a directory. I'm not removing the directory itself. So without async drops, it takes about 10 seconds on this box with 10,000 files in it. With async drops, less than a second. So
pretty awesome.
What you see though is that if you do remove the directory too, it will block for a while. It's still faster than without the async drops because you parallelize a lot of the unlinks, but it does block for a bit. I didn't gather those numbers here. And here's some histograms from BPF. So basically, I just spent the time spent in the Ceph unlink in the kernel, and these are in nanoseconds. When I gave the talk, I was thinking this was in jiffies, but Greg pointed out and others pointed out that my math was off, and I went back and looked, and yes, it was in nanoseconds. So you see here, the unlinks are all pretty slow without the async drops, but with them, we get down to just microseconds to do one.
Yeah. Cool.
So we can improve this too later. So RMDIR acts as implicit fsync, so we could improve that. we may need to tune some in-flight operations too. I think we have some cases. If you look here too, like on this, there are some outliers at the bottom on the async case. They're still faster overall, but I think there are some cases where we end up either going synchronous or end up blocked behind a pile of outstanding unlinked requests. And so we do get some that are slow. So what we see is that you get a whole lot of fast ones, and then a few slow. So it's a little spikier than we would probably need some work tuning, throttling some of these in some fashion. And then we may consider batching this stuff later. We haven't done that yet, but it's a possibility. And then async create, very similar situation. We have, DX, and you need DC caps, which is the same as the file cache cap. You need no negative dentry, so either dentry lease or we need DS on the parent directory plus completeness, and to know that that dentry doesn't exist. We also need a file layout for this case, and so that's one of the reasons we need a first synchronous create in a directory. What we do is store that file layout from the first create, and then just assume that any create in the directory afterward is going to get the same file layout. If the file layout in the directory changes, we have to revoke those caps, revoke the DC cap at least. And then we have we also need a delegated inode number. When you create a thing, you've got to create an inode and a dentry and all that stuff. And we can't do that unless we know what the inode number will be, because we have to hash it. And we also need to know what the object names will be for any writes we want to do. So that's the other part too. So we have to ensure that we know what the inode number is. And again, we just fire off the create call immediately, assume it's going to work, and then we go ahead and set things up and assume that everything went well. And then we also assume that the newly created inode gets full caps from you. And we always set O exclusive on it, because there's no reason not to. Rather have the thing fail than to go and overwrite, or do something strange. So for inode number delegation, basically we just hand out piles of about 500 at a time, given the default pre-alloc inode setting in the MDS. And currently these are all tied to the MDS session. I need to get with Zhang and talk to him about what this means in the case where, if we lose the session after we've already tried to transmit the request. So I think we have a little bit of work to do in that area, but at least proof of concept, it actually does work. So again, a little bit of performance numbers, creating 10,000 files this time and writing to them and everything. Without async drops, we get, it takes about 11 seconds on this box, a little bit more. But with them, this is about, roughly half. So, quite a bit of speed up case. Again, histograms, we have some time spent in Ceph atomic open. Down here, you can see down here we have some, some outliers where the red question marks are. Again, I think what happens is we get in some cases, in this case, where we just run out of inode numbers. So we're just spraying out unlinked so fast that we run out of inode numbers, and then by the time we get around to doing trying to do another one, we have to do a synchronous create, and then that ends up blocked behind all the pile of async creates that have been shuffled out. So again, we probably have some work to do with throttling on this. See if we can improve that. On the other hand, workloads where you create, 10,000 files at a time in a directory are pretty rare. So maybe it's not as big a deal as we thought for real workloads.
Does it work on directories or just
not yet? No, we don't have any async maker or async rm yet. That's maybe in the future we might add something like that.
Okay.
And we don't do symlink either or link. So
if you do a synchronous maker, does that get sequenced? You don't have to wait for the others to flush, although they'll be contingent, I guess, on the MDS. But
yeah, we don't wait on anything for that. But yeah, if you are doing a whole bunch of creates at the same time, it's quite likely that your maker will end up blocked behind all those creates. These are TCP sockets.
Yeah.
And so they do probably slow down a bit in that case. I think async makedir we could probably do fairly easily. RMdir is a little trickier, actually.
Yeah. Probably less common.
But yeah. Again, this is kind of the type of thing where we expect to expand on this later, right? We're not really doing it. So here's a kernel build test just out of free yucks. I did a kernel build, and I included the tar in this too because again you do have to do an async or a synchronous create in the directory. So by doing it this way, by including the tar, we can also ensure that that we have or increase the likelihood that we'll have correct caps to do async creates with the kernel build. So again, without async drops, we get about it's close to 5 minutes to do a build on this Vox, and with async drops, it shaves about 50 seconds off. And it turns out that it's about 20% improvement, which is pretty significant.
Cool.
So again, we have some opportunities to improve this thing. If we can, rsync in particular would be nice to do better. It does rsync. Usually we'll build the file, create a file, write to it, set all the attributes, and then rename it into place. It would be nice to be able to not have to. I don't know that it will benefit much from the current state of this code. So we probably may have to do something where we either have to do some sort of batching or handle an async rename in some fashion. And then we could also add stuff, batch create similar to UNLINK. We could, add other operations, makedir, symlink, doing in-place renames. And we also need a lot of work on error handling, which is the bugaboo for this whole thing, right? So, what do you do if this, if we send out a create, we go and write to the file, close it maybe even, and we've, finished at that point. Now all of a sudden it comes back and says, oh, that create didn't work, right? So we have to, when I started this thing, I kind of hung the whole concept on this idea where the fsync man page basically says, this paragraph where it suggests that you have to fsync a directory after a create, fsync the parent directory after create to ensure that the entry hits the disk. Mm-hmm. Modern journal file systems, it's not really a problem, right? They all journal the create before they return to userland. So you almost never hit this situation. So I think this was like, this paragraph was written like when ext2 was prevalent. But in any case, we can sort of, bend the rules a little and try to, assert that you have to do that for this thing. And so, here's some, basically what we do after a failed unlink. We do we mark the directory non-complete, invalidate the entry, and then we set a write back error on the parent directory so that it will show up if you do an fsync on the directory. And then after a failed create, we, again, invalidate the entry. We also should probably mark the directory non-complete because we don't really know what the state is at that point. And we also set a write back error on the parent directory and on the newly created inode. So one idea we have is it would be to propagate errors for the parent directories all the way up to the root of the mount. This is all client-side stuff too, so MBS doesn't need to be involved in that. But that's one possibility, right? And then if you were doing something like maybe like a kernel build, right? Where you create a directory, untar the thing in there, build, do a build in there, and then collect the result. You could open a high-level directory and call fsync on it at the end of the thing, and see whether you got any errors. Another potential possibility is to use syncfs, which is a system call. But the syncfs in the Linux kernel right now needs a bit of work. It will only return errors reliably for ebadf if you pass in a bad file descriptor, and so we need to do some overhaul in there.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So in any case, we may need new interfaces at the end of this thing. So anyway, that's basically the idea.
What's the status of this? Is that the unlink is upstream in the kernel, but the async creates aren't, or are they both in?
And actually, at this point, I did the userland code and the MDS is mostly done. Thing has got a pull request up for the userland client. For the kernel, I have async unlink code in the testing branch, and it works. But I asked Ilya not to merge it just yet. I think I'm going to have to rework some of the underlying code to handle creates better, and I don't really want to merge the unlink part until I know what that's going to look like. So I'm thinking we're probably, we might probably will get some of this in for 5.7. I'm hoping, but if not, then so probably this summer, at the earliest probably, or maybe in the fall. To have all this in. And again, this will probably be optional in some fashion too. It's something you would turn on, at least for now. Right now I've got it under a module parameter, and I'm not sure that's really what we want to mount option. So, again, there's still a lot of rough edges on this code, and I want to make sure that we've got at least a decent story for error handling before we unleash this on the world. I've got some work to do in there. I'm hoping within the next few months I'll have this polished up a little better and better idea when it will go in.
Cool, awesome. Okay,
thanks.
That's really exciting.
It's actually pretty neat. I see this actually probably potentially being useful for other file systems too. Ceph in particular has SMB3 has support for writable directory releases, and so it could potentially do this as well. So we may have some. So I'm hoping to go to LSF this year, and so I'll have some discussion with some folks there, and we'll see if there are other file systems that want to do this. Maybe we can kind of share infrastructure in some fashion.
Yeah.
Nice work, Jeff. Thanks for sharing.
Awesome. All right. Any questions on that? All right, next topic is FFS feature bits. Is that you, Patrick?
Yep. I put the Etherpad in the chat. Basically, we have. I'm canvassing for opinions on what we should, how we should move forward on the meaning of FFS feature bits. So for those who aren't aware, we have linked to the docs. It's also an Etherpad. The Etherpad has the link too, but there's this minimum client version now that's in the MDS map for the file system. And you can set that you don't want clients older than a particular release to connect to mount FFS. The original reason for this was the snapshot format changed in Mimic, and so we simultaneously added a gating feature to prevent older clients from connecting or from mounting FFS. Didn't understand it, so it was the original use case for this, and it's been in since Mimic. Going forward, though, it's become unclear what it means to be a particular client. So an Autolus client or a Mimic client, or now an Octopus client, because especially when you look at the kernel client, not all the features that we have are actually considered essential. So I'm going to link to that too. Those are the feature bits, the actual code. So right now we have a separate bit for each release, and then we have several bits for particular features. The idea that the clients and the MDS can negotiate which features they support. Some of them don't actually require compliance, or for example, the reclaim client bit, which is bit 10. If a client doesn't know how to do reclaim, the MDS doesn't really care because it's just the client's the one that initiates that request. Up to now, we've had separate bits for each release. So if you have a kernel client, if you want to say a kernel client supports Nautilus, so you would just set that particular feature bit, which doesn't really mean anything. It just says that we consider it a Nautilus client at that point. But the rest of the feature bits may not be supported. So the question is this, I'm not convinced this is the right way to express this. I've been considering maybe we should have a set of bits, which there may not be any new bits in a given release, but something we consider essential to be considered a Nautilus client, and then bitwise OR them all together. And then a new release would also bitwise OR with the previous release. We have a running collection of bits there rather than a single new bit. But most of the features are actually negotiated. So go ahead, Sage.
It's tricky because what does Nautilus client mean if it's a kernel? Like the kernel can support various other feature bits, but having the named release part only makes sense if it's if you actually implement them all in order. And presumably, the reason to do this is we're not going to actually do them all in order. So, I guess it's an alias for the things that the server supports at that time. But you would basically not want to require features based on the named releases, it seems.
I mean, do we even, what's the utility of having a named release feature?
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
My suggestion was sort of that we would express each named version as a mask, right? And these are the required features you need to have in order to say you are that version.
Well, but I mean, what would we use that for?
Yeah, but that gets tricky with we've had this problem with UpMap, which is supported since for a number of kernel releases now, more than a dozen, I think. But only very recently we started reporting the set of features that we support in the kernel has only recently become sufficient to report Luminous back to the cluster. And up until then, it was Joule, and we had this giant confusion on the mailing lists because people would attempt to enable attempt to set the min-compat setting, and find out that they have clients connected that they report themselves as Joule, even though they support the UpMap feature, which is the only thing that as far as the clients are concerned, as far as the users were concerned, this was the only Luminous feature that they wanted. But we had to report the mask that we reported was considered as Joule by the servers, by the monitors. So I think we need to be very careful with name releases going forward.
Yeah, I almost wonder if we should remove that
because
mapping of feature bits to versions because it's too confusing.
Yeah, this went on for like a dozen kernel releases, simply because we didn't support the vectorized addresses in the messenger, and we couldn't implement that because that feature bit is shared with the file system, like birth time and something else. The Ceph feature bit infrastructure isn't actually a single 64-bit field. It's like a bit vector. So we don't have to worry about any shortage of feature bits like we do with Rados. I say we just every tiny feature just gets its own feature bit, and we never have anything named there.
Yeah. I think that would be the case, and then possibly defining masks for Nautilus _ server supported or something, and just so we know which release on the server side the features were added in. Might be there just for like informational purposes, perhaps, but I'm not even sure if we would use those in the code. It's the thing you're talking about is also a problem on the regular feature bits right now, because if you look at the client, like if you dump mon sessions, it tells you what version it thinks the client is based on the feature bits, and right now it says Luminous, I believe, for Octopus. And that's just because there haven't been there's a special function that tries to like map the like client compatibility. I don't know, it's confusing. It's like even I can't keep straight what its purpose is and what it should mean and whether it's wrong or it's fine. No. Makes me nervous.
Okay, so if I'm trying to summarize this, if we stop naming or creating feature bits associated with some release, how should we change the interface that sets them in compat? Maybe we should have that be a collection of bits that are required, or maybe we should just stop updating that? I mean, originally it made sense because of the Mimic client, but going forward, I'm not sure, because most of these bits are just negotiated. It's not essential that the client actually implement.
Yeah, I think you just want to say, like, the reason we do this is so we can turn on a feature, right? And so we can say, require this feature. Like, there's no reason it needs to be release based instead of
it seems like
it actually wants.
It's like if you create like a regular, for example, ext4 file system, there is a feature bit mask that you can pass, like feature bit names separated by commas that you can pass to the MKFS utility. And there is a set of default features, which comes from file in /etc e2fs.conf. I'm not saying that we need to have like a default file, but we can have some mapping for, if you want to use, like, taking snapshots as an example, like if you want to use the new snapshot format, then this is the mask that maps to that. But the point is that we shouldn't tie that to a particular named release. But to particular like feature sets. So for example, if a snapshot feature consisted of like two separate feature bits that for some reason, we missed something and we had to introduce a second feature bit, then sure, we can have, min_compat client equals snapshots or something, and that turns on those 2 or 3 feature bits that are required to use snapshots safely. My point is that it just shouldn't be named Nautilus or Octopus, because that creates confusion everywhere.
Yeah, it seems like that should be done in terms of feature bits. That the key piece of information that's needed, though, for a user is basically really good documentation about, for any given feature bit, what version was it implemented on the server side and on the user space client, and also what kernel versions did it appear in. So you need to have like a chart that has a column for the Ceph version for the server and user space clients, and then also for the mainline kernel, and then probably for any like standard downstream or other kernels that people are using, because sometimes it gets backported, so that they know that it appears in 5.4 and CentOS 7.2 and whatever kernels matter. Otherwise, it's like hard to know what to do when you can enable something.
All right, makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Someday, hopefully, we can. I think we're in a little bit better position on the other feature bits, on the regular feature bits. Because we managed to reclaim a bunch of them, and we're using sort of complicated masks now, but it's still annoying. Feature annoying.
Great. Speaking of that, did we already do the reclamation for Octopus, or are there still more we could do for the release?
I'm pretty sure that I went through and made a pass after Nautilus was out to reclaim, but
yeah, I thought you did too. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, it's probably after Octopus is out we can do another round.
Yeah, I think you did that for Octopus earlier. I remember that one.
We need a checklist of all the stuff because there's all this like per release stuff to do with the. It's a long list now of places where each daemon has to set a compat bit and not whatever. It gets Next time around, we're gonna make a list.
This time,
don't forget stuff. Yeah, this time around. Cool. Okay. Any other topics? Anything else anybody wants to bring up? We did have. We had a whole agenda for Cephalocon for the Developer Summit Day, which is chat. I wonder if we should plan to do this online next month. We won't actually be there in person.
We're having something like a virtual dev summit that might make sense.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, we can just schedule like 3-hour blocks or something like that and just work our way through these topics.
Of course, more challenging if you are not all in the one place and you are really present. But maybe if you can split them up and go through them one by one.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Well, something to think about come March. What's this? So, we can talk about it in the leader call. All right. Anything else? Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.